Okay. Well, Bore da, good morning. Welcome to our update on induction session. Lovely to have you with us. We've got lots of information this morning, and Hannah will ably take us through lots of information that will help us in terms of thinking about the changes around induction. But predominantly, we're going to concentrate on being aware of the changes to the induction support and everybody who supports that process, not just what's changing for NQTs from September. And aligned to that, it'll be important that everyone knows their roles and responsibilities in that process, because whether you've got NQTs or not, or are planning to have any, it's important that you're prepared, and that all schools are prepared across Wales. Hannah will talk to us a little bit about the NQT, an early career offer that's available from September. And then, and most importantly, probably for lots of you, we'll just confirm the changes in funding arrangements around all those people that support NQT induction over the coming year. So without further ado, Hannah, thanks very much for all your hard work on this. I'll hand over to you and take us through the session. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Deb. And I can see on the call we've got some really experienced kind of previous IMs, EVs, so it'd be great, to have your questions and your thoughts as we go through this as well. And there are places where we'd love to hear your voice if you have got any questions. So we're just starting off the session today by reminding you of the changes that have already come into place following the consultation that was held a couple of years ago now, looking at some initial changes to the NQT induction process. So some of those changes that have now come in include the change to the minimum time period in which a result can be issued for an NQT. So we expect the majority to take around 380 sessions, which is the equivalent of 3 full terms. But there is flexibility now, and we can issue a result after 110 sessions. And this allows us, for those perhaps supply teachers that had met all of those induction standards, they'd shown progress, they'd completed lesson observations, they'd done their PLEs, but they were just struggling to make that final stretch to that 380. It allows us that opportunity to give them the result, having shown the progress towards the standards. There was also a 5-year time frame reintroduced. So NQTs have 5 years in which to complete the induction process. So that's 5 years from the point at which they gain their QTS now moving forward. Or if they gained their QTS a number of years ago, it was 5 years from the introduction of this new guidance. Induction can now take place in PRUs, which has been a great addition, and we've had a number of NQTs go through, supported by PRUs now over the last academic year. And then there were some changes in terms of the structure and the placement of IMs, external verifiers, and how supply teachers were supported. So that's the changes that have already come into place. And what we're going to do now is look at the additional changes that will be coming in from September 24, building on what's already in place in the induction system. So if we could go on to the next slide Nessa, please. Thank you. So we've given you the headlines here, and what we're going to aim to do is take you through each one of these bullet points in a little bit more detail as we go through the session today. So all NQTs in Wales are going to be supported by an induction mentor. That includes supply teachers. So they will have an induction mentor allocated in the same way that EVs would have previously been allocated. So we'll have a number of induction mentors across the region supporting supply teachers. The role of external verifier is no longer going to be present within the induction process, but like I said, there will be a role for induction mentors to support supply teachers, and we'll give you a lot more information about how you can apply to undertake that role and the funding associated with it. There's then the introduction of a new validator role, and this will be to sample 50% of the NQTs across the region, and they will quality assure the induction process. The validators will be deployed at the discretion of the awarding body and the regional lead officer. So in the same way that we would allocate, again, external verifiers, if you take on the validator role, you'll be assigned to a number of NQTs. But the difference will be that you're very much focusing on that QA process, and you'll be working with the induction mentor a lot more rather than the NQT themselves to ensure that induction process is being followed and the support is there for the NQT. The Education Workforce Council will provide funding for all of the roles within induction. So that's the NQT, the induction mentor and the validators. And the big change then for NQTs and for you supporting NQTs within your settings is the change to the PLE requirements. So NQTs will no longer be expected to complete the 10 to 20 PLEs linked to all of the standard descriptors, but instead they will complete 2 professional inquiry projects over the course of their induction period. Now, this is much more in line with what they will have experienced throughout their initial teacher education, and we're working towards building that reflection on their own practice and on the impact in terms of what they're doing in their classrooms and the impact they're having on the learners that they are supporting. And we'll take you through, like I said, each of these now in a lot more detail and hopefully be able to take any questions you might have. Thanks, Deb. So we're going to start with head teachers. So your role within the NQT induction process is really making sure that your school is NQT ready. And we always say you should be NQT ready whether you already know you're employing an NQT from September, or you have a member of staff that is an NQT, or that you don't currently have an NQT, because we know how sometimes flexible staffing needs to be, and there may be opportunities throughout the academic year where an NQT would join you. So you can be ready by making sure you've got a trained induction mentor within your staff, within your school setting, that would be able to support any newly qualified teacher that was to join you. You're then responsible for ensuring all the NQTs working within the school receive the regular mentoring support from that trained induction mentor. So providing them the time and space to undertake those mentoring activities to the best of their ability, and that the NQTs do receive that additional 10% non-contact time to engage with the national and regional induction offer in terms of professional learning. And the funding to support this is still released by the EWC on a termly basis, and you'll receive that towards the end of each term to support all of those activities that will have taken place. Okay, thanks, Deb. So in terms then of the validators, the new role, if you like, that has come into the induction process, the validators are going to work with us across the region with a sample of 50% of NQTs. Now, the reason we say 50% of NQTs is that we have to link a validator to an NQT's profile for them to be able to view the profile. But what they're actually going to be doing is quality assuring the induction process. So if you have an NQT within your school, their main point of contact is always going to be the induction mentor. They wouldn't necessarily have a lot of contact with the validator, because the validator will be working with the induction mentor to quality assure the induction process. So they'll be checking, for example, that the mentors have been on the professional learning, that they have also signposted their NQTs to attend the professional learning. They've set the development priorities. They're working with them on their professional inquiry projects, and just providing all of that support in terms of making that NQT's journey a successful one as they go through the induction process. So the validators may not stay with the same NQT for the entirety of the induction process, because if they are allocated to one NQT, they have that meeting with the induction mentor and everything is exactly as it should be, that NQT is getting fantastic support. There is no need for that validator to complete any follow-up QA activities, and they may be reassigned to a different NQT to work with a different induction mentor across the region. So there's very much flexibility there in the deployment of validators. If you have a staff member that has previously been an induction mentor or an external verifier, and you think they would fit the role of being able to undertake that QA process, we'd love to hear from you, and there will be an application form a little bit later on for anyone that would like to undertake the validator role. And the funding will be from the EWC directly to the school, and it's £400 per term per NQT supported. Okay, so similar to the way in which the EVs would have signed up, they would have had their EWC account, they would have had NQTs allocated. The validator role will work in a similar way, but they will very much be QA in the induction process, working with the mentors to make sure all the steps are there in terms of support for that NQT. Okay, thanks, Deb. So just in terms of professional learning then for validators, and we are going to be looking for them to be allocated from you as schools. So all of our validators will come from schools. If your NQT within your setting has been allocated a validator, as a head teacher, you will receive an email from us to say a validator has been allocated, and they'll be getting in contact with the induction mentor to quality assure the NQT induction process. But as I already alluded to, the NQTs themselves may not have much contact with that validator. They will primarily work with the induction mentor in the school. And there is a flexible approach. So you may have a validator for part of the induction process, but not necessarily the entirety of the induction process. And then in terms of professional learning for the validators, they will be required to attend the briefing session. These will be held in the autumn term, and we'll be sharing dates with you very shortly. Very similar to the induction mentor and the older EV briefings, we'll go through all the roles and responsibilities and what needs to be undertaken within the role. And there'll be everything there in terms of the support that the validator will need to complete that role. We will also be asking validators to attend regular meetings with ourselves, so possibly with me as the induction lead, just to have that communication in terms of their QA activities. So what are they finding across the region? Is there any additional PL support needed for perhaps some IMs or for them in their role? So we can have that open communication and make sure that the support that's needed is being provided. So there'll be our sessions on Teams to allow that flow of communication and information from the validators as well. Okay, so are there any questions? I'm going to pause at this point. I feel like I'm giving you an awful lot of information as we go through the session today. So time to just take a pause. Any questions so far in relation to kind of the head teacher role or the validator role that we've shared with you?
Hannah, can I ask if NQTs have already started, but they're not going to be finished now, do the new rules apply to them from September as well, or do they carry on in the old system?
Yeah, great question. We are going to cover it later. You're absolutely right. They will stay on the old system. Okay. So they wouldn't be expected to do the inquiry projects. They would stay on the system that they started their induction process on. The only change will be there that they won't be supported by an external verifier because the verifiers are no longer within the system. Okay. So they would have an induction mentor that would continue to support them throughout the process, but they would continue writing their PLEs if they've already started. So they'll finish on the guidance that they started on.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, no problem.
Hannah, can I ask as well,
please? Please do.
Currently, if an NQT isn't quite seeing eye to eye with the IM, or they're not having their 10% time, they usually go to the EV for support, so the EV can be kind of that negotiator or communicator. How will that happen in the future?
So if they haven't, obviously if they had a validator allocated, they would be able to raise that with the validator. So they'd have 50% of our NQTs will have that option. If not, all of our contact details, so my contact detail is always shared with all NQTs at the start during briefing sessions. Obviously it's on the website, so they'd be able to reach out to myself and we could look at either then putting that validator support in if they hadn't been allocated a validator, or look at what support we could then broker to support that NQT.
So they will eventually know who their validator is? Yeah,
so if an NQT is allocated a validator, they will know because they'll see the name of the validator on their profile in the same way they would see the EV's name appear on their profile. But where the system is sort of working as it should with the IM fulfilling their role and the school, the validator would have a light touch with the NQT because they would be QAing the process of support, but the NQT would have access to that validator's detail. So then if there was any issues arising, the validator then would be able to pick those up with the NQT. If there wasn't a validator allocated, like I said, my details are shared with all the NQTs. So they'd be able to reach out to me for some support, and we would look at probably then putting a validator in to QA that process to then provide any support that might be needed. Like we said, to make sure that 10% time is allocated to provide any signpost to professional learning opportunities, be that either for the NQT or the IM, in relation to kind of picking up depending on what the needs are there moving forward.
Thank you.
And can I come in there? I mean,
Yeah,
I think it's
please do.
important to note though that, and I think it's probably good that you've raised it, Kerry.
Yeah.
You know, what we'd want to try and do is those issues, we would try and encourage NQTs to be talking to their IM, you know, to try and you know, deal with those issues internally before reaching out and to anyone externally, you know, particularly, you know, in that situation, if there's some, you know, it might be a confusion over the 10% because, you know, you may well have sent them on a 5-day Welsh course or something. So, you know, sometimes the PL can be blocked, can't it? It hasn't got to be weekly. It can be done. So, you know, I think what we've got to encourage people to do is, you know, have those initial conversations, honest conversations together in their school first before they're reaching out and drawing a third party in. You know, as a head teacher, I'm sure you'd want to know if there was an issue within your school rather than, you know, an EV coming along and telling you, did you realise there was this issue going on? So I think that's important that we sort of communicate that with people, you know, as we move forward, because the system is changing. The other point I think is important to note is our intention is when we're mapping the validators to all schools is it's 50% of NQT. So we will try and look at where those NQTs are placed and try and maintain some sort of validator across the school stock. So for the sake of argument, if we've got between 200 and 300 NQTs, we will try and look at validators touching base with as many of our schools in the region as we possibly can, as opposed to, you know, being attached to 9 NQTs in one school. We may only link with one, but though then we've got a conversation going in more schools, if you know what I mean. So we plan to deploy our resources in that way so that we still keep as much contact with as many schools as we possibly can. That makes sense.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. Great questions there. And like I said, these are the type of questions that we know will come up. And as we go through the process, it'll be great to have your feedback, obviously, as we're implementing these changes as well, so that you have all the support you need. So we're going to move on now in terms of the induction mentor role. So the trained induction mentor will be responsible for supporting the NQT with the learning and teaching and jointly identifying the development priorities. So similar to the role you've already undertaken and completing those reviews. They'll also support the NQT with their inquiry projects, as well as providing that regular mentoring support. So we will be looking for our IMs to be using the development priorities as a way to support the NQTs to come up with their inquiry focus. And during the induction mentor briefing sessions and the induction mentor development programme professional learning offer, we'll be providing support to induction mentors about how this can be done and how you can best support the NQTs throughout their inquiry projects. You'll also be responsible for undertaking the lesson observations, and the change here really comes in terms of you will be the sole responsibility on you to create that final review and recommendation. So you will recommend to the AB whether the NQT should pass, fail, or an extension be given at the end of their induction period. There will also be then the opportunity for all induction mentors to participate in the moderation of profiles. So we will be expecting induction mentors to come along to those sessions as a good professional learning opportunity for them to share the professional inquiry projects and to have that conversation about, you know, how they found that professional dialogue with their NQTs. We'll be looking at the development priorities that have been set and the profiles as a whole, so we can moderate that induction process. So an excellent professional learning opportunity for the induction mentors there as well. So if we go on to the next slide then, you can see there in terms of the professional learning requirements. So it is a briefing session again in the autumn term. Like I said, we will run through all of the roles and responsibilities of the mentor in much more detail there in terms of how you can best support with those inquiry projects and the types of conversations and questions you can be asking your NQTs. We are also continuing to run the National Induction Mentor Development Programme. The 3 online sessions will support with the role of the induction mentor and that role of moderation sessions then as well as we move towards the end of the induction process. So if an IM has any queries about the NQT induction process, of course they can contact their validator, as we've just explained, and myself as well as we move through in this new process. If you have any questions at all, please do reach out, and we'll be very happy to support you in your role as induction mentor. So are there any questions really in terms of the mentoring role now? There are a few kind of key changes there in terms of that final review and recommendation in terms of attending moderation. But on the whole, your mentoring role, it is the key role in the induction process. So it is about providing that NQT with that regular mentoring support, having those professional conversations around their inquiry projects and supporting them in terms of showing their progress towards the standards. Any questions at all there? It's gone silent. Hopefully it's not information overload, and hopefully that was a clear bit of information instead, but we will provide lots of opportunities to pause. So if you do have any questions a bit later on, we're happy to take those as we go through. So moving on to the NQT themselves now. So NQTs who commence induction from September 24, so this comes back to the question we had from Bethan earlier, will no longer be expected to write the 10 to 20 PLEs. Instead, they will be completing 2 professional inquiry projects, which are more holistic and aim to show their development and demonstrate progress against the 5 standards holistically. And the mentor then will look at the whole picture. So they will undertake 3 lesson observations, which is about 1 per term, and they'll work with the NQT on their development priorities, their reviews, and looking at how they're shaping their inquiry projects to really show that holistic progress towards the standards. It is a shift in terms of what the NQTs have been expected to do, but it very much builds on what their experiences from ITE will be, and obviously the role of inquiry and research within the education system currently. So we hope it's a really positive move that allows the NQTs to really reflect on their own practice and develop an area that is bespoke to their own professional learning journey in terms of where they need to develop their own practice. Okay, so again, for NQTs, we will be providing briefing sessions, and we will run through all of these expectations and provide examples of professional inquiry projects to them. So they should have a good understanding of the process that they need to undertake as well. So if we move on, in terms of the professional learning offer for NQTs and into early career, we can see that we're starting in term 1 with those national briefing sessions, where we outline the process of induction. We'll introduce the idea of the professional inquiry projects. And these are national sessions with nationally agreed areas of focus. So the first 2 are facilitated online, and they will look at, like I said, the process, and then we'll spend a lot of time unpicking the inquiry projects and providing support to NQTs. The remaining part of the national sessions then are delivered in EAS partner schools, covering the nationally agreed content and providing the opportunities for school to link that theory and practice within our partner schools. And that's also supplemented by the NQT network meeting, allowing them that time to collaborate with their peers across the region. As you move into term 2, we then are supplemented by the local offer in terms of the focus on pedagogy. So we'll have a live practice offer where NQTs can go into our partner schools again, can explore an element of live practice and have time to collaborate and reflect on their own practice then moving forward. And again, that is supplemented by the NQT network meeting. And then it moves into, as we get into the early career, then that really bespoke element in terms of those NQTs and early career teachers really being able to select from a wide range of PL in terms of what is most appropriate to their own development priorities. They'll be able to work with their mentors, look through the PL offer, look at their development priorities and select the PL then that is really appropriate to them for their own development needs. And again, those network meetings are there and can support them as they continue throughout their early career. Okay, so a similar model in terms of the PL for our NQTs. And in terms of continuation of support, so all NQTs that started their induction before September, they will continue on the current system relating to the guidance that they had when they commenced their induction. So they would still continue to write their PLEs. The only difference is that they will be supported by their induction mentor, but not by an external verifier. So if they're within your school, your mentor will continue working with them. If they're on supply, an induction mentor will be allocated to them to continue and finish their induction journey. And then from September 2024, no external verifiers will be allocated to any of the NQTs in the system, but 50% will be supported by that validator role. So in terms of funding, and I know this is always kind of where the interest lies in terms of what you can do to be able to undertake these roles. The funding is retrospective in the same way that it is currently, and it's paid by the EWC on a termly basis. It's really important that the induction notification forms are sent off by schools in a timely manner at the start of the employment of an NQT, and that the claim forms are sent off at the end of each term or at the end of the employment of the NQT if that falls before the end of term, and that funding will then be released by the EWC. So for full-time NQTs, it's £900 at the end of each term, and IMs are funded at £400 per term per NQT that is supported. And that is the same as if you are an IM in school or you're an IM supporting supply teachers. And again, just like we said, it's important for schools to send off the induction notification form. If you're an IM for a supply teacher, it's really important that you communicate with them that they are logging their sessions so that that funding can be released to the IM for that support, so we can see the NQT is actively undertaking induction. And for validators, they will also be funded at £400 per term per NQT in the same process, in that the EWC will release funding to schools at the end of each term. So a very similar model to what was currently in place in terms of EWC funding to schools supporting NQT induction. So are there any questions at that point? I'm happy to pause if there's any funding questions. No? Okay, hopefully it's all clear. It's making sense as we go through. We are nearing the end of the presentation, so if you did have any questions, we can answer those at the end. So in terms of the process of the cause of concern, and Kerry, I think this comes back perhaps to the earlier point you were making, the process of cause of concern is very similar in that there would be the initial kind of concerns raised within the school. If the NQT is not making the progress you would have hoped to see, there'll be professional dialogue between the NQT, the induction mentor, and the head teacher, and you will come up with a plan that sits in addition to what's on the NQT's profile at a school level, where you can support that NQT and perhaps break their development priorities down into smaller sections that, you know, they're smart targets, you've got time frames on them, and the support identified to hopefully make that progress that's needed. If after that school level support plan has not had the desired effect, you would need to contact us, Deb and myself, to make us aware that actually you do have concerns around this NQT, and a validator would then be assigned if you didn't have one already. Then working with Deb and myself, we can work with you to action that formal cause for concern process. So this is a formal level of support. The profile and the process will be flagged on the profile, and there'll be an action plan put in place, and following a meeting with the NQT, they will receive in writing then the areas in which they have been identified that they have not made progress in, and the next steps will be identified in terms of that action plan of support. And following that, regular meetings will be put in place to monitor that progress. So similar structure. If you have any concerns about progress, I would urge you just get in contact with me. I'm happy to meet with you as a school, and we can make sure this process is being followed, and that you as a school and the NQT have everything you need to put this process in place. And in terms of working with you to provide any additional support that may be required. Okay. So if we can go on to the next slide. So in terms of induction mentors supporting supply teachers, I did say we would share with you the application form. So if you have been a previous EV or you've been an induction mentor and you think you would like to continue working supporting NQTs outside of your school across the region, there is the opportunity to work as an induction mentor supporting supply teachers. where you would be that main mentor for them in terms of answering any questions they have, providing support for their professional inquiry projects, and setting their targets and doing the usual lesson observations as they go through induction. So we would like you to register your interest, and then you will need to attend that briefing session in the autumn term. Following completing the form and attending the briefing, we will then allocate you your NQTs, and you'll be able to access them in the same way through logging into your EWC account and seeing who's been allocated to you. So if you are interested, it'd be lovely to hear from you and get that form completed, please. And then we'll be able to start that allocation process in the autumn term. As with the current system, the majority of the allocations are done in autumn, but there may be allocations made throughout the year as new NQTs on supply come into the region. Similarly for validators, again, if you have been an external verifier or an induction mentor and you know the induction process, we'll be looking to recruit validators to sample and QA the induction process. This is a slightly more flexible role in that you may work with a number of NQTs as validator for sections of their NQT induction process. The same process applies in that we would like you to complete the application form. You will need to then attend the briefing session in the autumn term, and we will allocate the NQTs to you via your EWC account, and there'll be regular check-ins with you then throughout the year to allow you to feedback your QA and what you found, and then we can alter the allocations as needed as we move through the induction process and through the academic year. But the initial stages would be to complete the form, attend the briefing session, and then your first allocations will be made in the autumn term. Okay, so that brings us, I think, to the end of the session today. If you do go away and you think you've got some further questions, please don't hesitate to contact us. We'd love to hear from you now if you do have any questions. I feel I've talked at you and given you a lot of information today, but hopefully it's been helpful in understanding the changes that are coming from September to the induction process. If we've waited the 7 seconds, is that the stunned silence? I'm not sure. Hopefully you're still with us. But thank you, Deb, for sharing.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. Thanks everyone for coming along. We'll make sure you get copies of the PowerPoint and the recording in case you want to refer to it at a later date. But thanks very much for joining us. And like Hannah said, any questions or queries, please get in touch. Diolch yn fawr.